if HR professionals could be thinking of women in terms of what's the next opportunity, it may not be vertical, but it could be horizontal in an interesting way to help women get a new experience and expertise on them, which feeds their own belief system that I can learn, I can do any of these things. It's possible that HR professionals could have some magic there. They could have some real insight that would encourage that kind of movement and learning agility, which we know by the research is one thing that leads to longer term success.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, welcome back. Really excited for the show this week. I wish I was recording about 5 minutes ago because we've already started to talk about some amazing topics. So I'm really excited for the content today. With us today, we have Brenda Wensil and Kathryn Heath. They are the authors of the book that just came out recently, I Wish I'd Known This, 6 Career Accelerating Secrets for Women Leaders, highlighting the don'ts as well as the do's for aspiring women leaders in any profession. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Well, first of all, I can already tell this is going to be a wonderful conversation. I'm extremely excited to connect with both of you. I want to start off with the question that I ask almost every author, which is, what prompted you to write a book and invest all of the time that it takes to write a book about career accelerating secrets for women leaders?
Well, Kyle, it's a good question because this is Kathryn's third book. So when we started talking about putting this in book format, she said, why are we doing this? And we both had that conversation. And here's our answer to it. And we keep coming back to this over and over again. And it's that we think the world would be a better place if there were more women leaders in it and stronger women leaders with, owning their impact. And we're all about helping women get to that point, elevating them so that they move, forward and faster in their careers. So this book came about because we are coaches. We're executive coaches. We have corporate histories. But this is what we focus on now. And in many of our coaching sessions, we would get to the end of it and the women we were coaching would say, I wish I'd known this 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 6 months ago. And so it became kind of a natural slogan that we leaned on. And sure enough, it was the most popular title that we surveyed. But it's really about capturing and codifying for all women out there to have a coach kind of on their shoulder, we like to say, because many women don't have access to a coach or they don't have access to great HR people in their organizations, or they're working for organizations that don't have HR expertise and other coaches available or advocates available. And in this book, it captures all of that. Great questions, stories, examples, strategies that you can work on all in one place. And that was really why we did it. We said, let's capture all of this in one place so that all women who choose to read it will have kind of a personal coach in their hip pocket.
Another thing I would add to that is that we saw, as Brenda said, these trends. We kept seeing them over and over. I'm a researcher by training. And data was just jumping out. And these things were happening over and over again. And when we coded the data and we thought, we got to put it out there. There's just, these trends are so huge that we want women to know them. And they probably are helpful to men too, but we coach women, so we know it will help women.
Women of all levels too. Kathryn and I, through the course of all this, we're coaching women of all industries and geographies and levels in the organization, as high up as the C-suite, and as far south as the mid-level manager. So it's really applicable to any stage of a career and any level of a career.
Absolutely. I think, a really important topic, and it's one of those, in my seat as an HR professional, a lot of times we talk about this, and we we want more women leaders. And, but I think a lot of times the actual, tactical actions that need to be taken get lost in the shuffle, right? There's maybe we do a training program, or we put together an employee resource group, but really empowering individuals within your organization to ascend, I think it's different than some of the lip service that I think many HR professionals want to dig into a little bit. So this isn't like Kathryn and Brenda's like opinion, right? This is like, as you mentioned, there's thousands of data points here that you went through to put together this book. So I'm curious to understand, maybe some of those high level trends that you observed as you really started to dig through what's going on that is preventing women from ascending into leadership, and some tactics to help.
Well, you're looking at me, Kathryn. There we go. Here's what I would start with is it's much of it has to do with stories we tell ourselves, and in most of the chapters in the book come back to this idea of how do we view ourselves in the world, and what is our belief system about our capabilities and our trajectory, what we can do versus what we could do or should do. And we limit ourselves. And in all 6 of these secrets, we'll find some form of a story or a belief that limits us from moving forward. And so that was a striking piece of our learning, and it's captured in every chapter. Really, we work through what is the story that we're telling ourselves about our reputation or about our ability to take on a new role or take on a new opportunity, and how is that limiting belief impacting us, and what do we do about it? How can we change that belief system to serve us better? So that was one thing, and I think that's sort of a thread through all 6 chapters.
Interesting. The stories that we tell ourselves that are may or may not be true, right?
Yep. Like, the reason that I didn't get this promotion, or the reason I didn't get on this project is this. And you got to check it out and find out, is that the real reason? Or is there another reason? Because you're driving blind if you don't know.
Or I don't know how many times we've heard women we coach, not even consider going for a promotion or another opportunity. And when we ask why, you'll come up with all kinds of things. I don't have any experience in that area, or I don't think I would be very good at that in that capacity, or I really like what I'm doing now. I think I'm going to sit tight. I mean, and there's a belief that is keeping us right where we are. And if we change that belief, there's a lot of possibility, that can happen.
I think that's really fascinating. And there's been some articles and some research done on, the fact that, in general, there's more of a hesitancy for a woman to apply for a job if she feels like she's unqualified, versus someone like me who's like, I'm totally unqualified, but I'm going to apply anyways.
Exactly.
It just happens.
Exactly. You nailed it.
You got it.
Guilty. How do you think I got in HR? But no, that's a funny story. That's a job that I didn't even really know if I was qualified or not, and I got into it and I realized, wow, I'm not qualified. I'm gonna have to go back and figure out how to do this.
And you're still doing it.
You're teachable. You're teachable.
Yeah, stay open-minded. So I think this is really interesting because as human resources professionals, we're asked to do a lot, right? So we're make sure payroll system's going right, make sure your compliance is good, make sure that your culture is where it needs to be. And oh, by the way, figure out how to go coach people and, kind of be like this, like this pseudo executive coach for people and structure these programs. But what happens inevitably, especially for generalists, is we get asked to do these things and we don't really know what we're doing. And that's just kind of the reality where, I don't have an adult education degree. So, for me to structure a learning and development program that's effective and beneficial is difficult, right? And so for HR professionals that are, understand kind of the importance of this, but are wearing a lot of different different hats or not really sure where to start, what guidance or advice would you give them to really kind of move this work forward within their organizations?
I think that's a strong question, multifaceted. But one of the things I think that you could do as an HR person is somebody comes to you for advice, send them out, help them make a list of who else they can go talk to. One of the chapters in the book is don't try to do a career alone. When I worked in banking, I thought if I asked for help as a woman, I would be seen as weak. So I tried to muscle through my career by myself. And what we know is that you need agents, you need amplifiers, you need sponsors, you need mentors, you need feedback givers. You need what we kind of call a board of directors. They don't meet, you don't pay them money, they don't even really know they're on your board of directors. But as you craft your career strategy, you're checking in with them. You're buying them a cup of coffee. I'm thinking about this job. What do you think? Or I'm thinking about this assignment. What do you think? They know you, they know your strengths. It can be former bosses, former teachers, colleagues. It can be anybody. But you've got to coach people to go get a support system around themselves and try not to you don't want to be overly dependent on you, the HR person. So they need to go get a lot of other people to give them information and help them guide themselves. I mean, we think a career is a business and you got to be the CEO of your business. And any good business person has got people around them that's giving them advice. So go get advice from people and steer your career.
The other thing I would add to that for HR professionals is to get the individual coming to them to be thinking about what is their own reputation and brand in the organization. We have a whole chapter devoted to this. It's called reputationality. And it is about how do you blend what your credentials, what your reputation is, what you're known for with who you are as an individual, what your special, unique traits are as a person, because that's a very differentiating characteristic. I'm a marketer by trade and by background, and so I think there's power in people marketing themselves in a genuine way. And this is what we've learned from women. They don't want to go and do this in a clinical, corporate kind of way, which is why we use the word brand less and less, and we use the word reputationality more and more, because what we find in working with women is they want to be known for something strong and credible, but not at the expense of their who they are and their core beliefs and their attributes as an individual. And so, boy, when you put those together, but what HR people can do is to ask the questions, what is it that you want to be known for in this organization? And now go ask, to Kathryn's point, go ask those 3 or 4 people on your list of support what they hear about you. What is their perception? What's the buzz, about you? And then come back and do some work and say, is there a gap between what you're hearing and what you want to hear? And if there is, you know exactly now what to go to work on. Kyle, back to your point earlier, we were talking before we started about perception management. And that's a lot of what this is about. And HR people can facilitate that process without having to be the knowledge, the recipient of all knowledge around all these things. They can facilitate women or others in the organization to go learn that on their own and apply it for themselves.
Absolutely. I think that's a really powerful point. And you've both made really, really relevant points that, HR doesn't have to do it all.
Right.
Right. I think a lot of times, like I think about my role as more of a connector, and just because of the vantage point that I have on an organization, if somebody comes to me looking for support, guidance, feedback, whatever, I probably know somebody else in the organization that's skilled at that.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody else that maybe has the same challenge and we can, put 2 people together that are working on solving the same problem and come up with, a solution together, things like that. And, at the end of the day, the other thing I'm very aware of is the fact that if a woman is looking for support in her career, I might not be the best person to help with that.
Mm-hmm.
purely because I do not possess that trait. I am not a subject matter expert. So, I think sometimes knowing, like you said, that you don't have to go this alone. The same thing goes for HR. Like, you don't have to try to navigate employees who are trying to work through this by yourself. You should be thinking about that. Who else can help? I want to circle back to this reputationality, which I love. I love that term. I do. I kind of hate the whole like personal branding thing. Like, I think it's so overdone, and it is like, it's very like corporate buzzwordy, right? I think it kind of misses the whole point. And I'm happy to see that, I think we're shifting now towards more of, kind of authenticity and humanity and, being true to yourself as opposed to an on brand version of yourself. But I think this is really interesting. And this is something that I think inherently in society, men have more leeway. We can be the bull in the china shop and not be labeled, as, the word that we're all thinking in our heads. But it's not the same for women. And I think that is starting to change slowly, but it still very much exists, at least in Western society. So, I'm curious about as you think about reputationality and as you think about, guiding women through this, what kind of guidance do you give to somebody who just feels like they are being asked to be somebody that they're not, or that they are being authentic and it's just not working within their organization? How do you work through that? What are some tactics to approach that?
I want to jump in here because Brenda came up with this term, but I want to make sure we know what it means. It's reputation. What are you known for? What do they say about Kyle? He's a rebel, and whatever it is that they say about you. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room or when they're talking about you in your career. And then there's that personality. Who are you? Like Brenda and I have a colleague who is very warm. She can talk to people on elevators. She connects with them. She is just the warmest, kindest person. So her brand is that she is a wonderful executive coach and a skill facilitator and learning designer, and she's incredibly warm. So those two things make her reputationality. It's her personality and her reputation. And she's got to go find out, and I think she knows this, that is that what she wants to be known for. And we talk a lot in the book. A common mistake we see over and over again is that people don't get enough feedback. So they just drive off a cliff because nobody told them, you're coming across in a way that, and you're landing on people that's not helpful. And your reputationality is not good. So you've got to get reputationality is bound up in getting feedback. And it's so important not to drive blind. And I think I said to you earlier, when we do executive coaching, one of the things we do is call people up and say, what do you think of him? Well, what's he like? And we write it down and give it back to you. Well, we wouldn't need to do that. We'd be out of business if people were getting feedback along the way. If they were saying just real quick feedback, like, oh, that close didn't go so well, or once you got the sale, you ought to have gotten out, whatever. It's just quick coaching, just like you would with somebody's golf swing or backhand, just like hold your head still, just coaching that helps people be more effective in feedback. You can tell I'm passionate about that.
It's hard, yeah. But Kyle, I think to also, what you're saying is it's just what we say to women is it's the optics are different. It's not fair, but it's a real thing right now in 2022. Who knew? But it is. I mean, and so we have to manage that. We wish it was different, but right now it may be a dynamic where we are. I mean, cultures of organizations are all very different, but there can be the optic that women just get judged differently or more harshly or more unfairly. And that is for a dynamic that we just have to be aware of and manage, like Kathryn said, and say, okay, well, how am I landing? And is that what I want? Is that what I want it to be? And then you go figure out how to fix it if it's not.
Yeah, I think it's powerful, and the reason I call it out is I think HR professionals have some ownership here. As we build our performance management systems, our talent assessment systems, as we identify internal candidates for promotions, we have to be aware that there is kind of that bias that exists. I think it's nice to think like it's not in my organization, but the reality is it probably is somewhere. You just haven't seen it, or you have seen it and you haven't paid attention to it. But I think the ownership from my standpoint is that's on us. That leader that says, "Oh, she's too much of a driver," or she's too quiet. Those sorts of things. It's taking a step back and saying, "Well, wait a minute. What does that mean? What what behaviors have you observed that make you think that that's a good thing or a bad thing? And how does that actually impact that person's continued career, promotion, promotability? Have we even asked them what they want to do in their career, right? The questions like that can shake some things loose that are pretty important.
Absolutely.
So I think I think we've hit on a couple really, really interesting topics. I do want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that that HR directly, kind of gets involved with, which is like women being underrepresented in the C-suite, under hiring, the demographics that maybe are leading indicators or lagging indicators that you don't have the right systems in place. As you were doing some of your research and you were writing some of these books, what were some of the common themes that you found within organizations that cause those organizations to struggle?
Well, there's a lot of research that shows that if you have a pipeline of women, and the reason there are not many at the C-suite is that they call it the broken rung. It starts happening really early. Organizations are hiring women at the entry level, but they get passed up for the first promotion pretty quickly. It starts dropping, and it's just like a pipe that's leaking all the way along. And so you have to figure out HR has to figure out how can I make sure these people that I hire in feel motivated and challenged, and like women will stay if they feel like that they can get promoted and grow. They will stay. And that's what organizations have got to do. HR people have got to have policies and systems and cultures that support that.
We also did some research this past year, Kyle, that your listeners might be interested in, and it's around this very idea of why is it that some women get momentum along this, what we call the power alley. You get to a certain point in the career, and some women are able to move through that toward the C-suite and others don't. And is there something happening there? And one of the things we found is that there's some real common dynamics with among the women who do succeed and who do get there. And we found it's things like, tenacity and being lifelong learners and things like that. But the other thing we saw is that more than 3/4 of the women that we talked with who had been very successful in their chosen careers is that at some point in time they'd made a big leap. They'd made a big move, whether that was to a different significant role jump, or they left a corporate role and went to a regional function or a field function for a time, or they left a company, and came back. But I say that because if HR professionals could be thinking of women in terms of what's the next opportunity, it may not be vertical, but it could be horizontal in an interesting way to help women get, a new experience and expertise on them which feeds their own belief system that I can learn, I can do any of these things. And I think sometimes HR people have a line of sight on opportunities that, women who have their heads down executing in their current role might not have. And if they lifted their head up long enough and found that opportunity, they also might be doing that limiting belief thing we talked about, which is, I don't know anything about real estate. Why would I go move over and take on that opportunity, even though everybody's telling me I should think about it? So it's possible that HR professionals could have some magic there. They could have some real insight that would encourage that kind of movement and learning agility, which we know by the research is one thing that leads to longer term success. So
it's really interesting. It's it's similar to what we just talked about, which is kind of not just connection to others, but connection to opportunities. Right?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Fascinating. The other thing I wanted to ask about this, we won't have time to get through all this. I'm sure this is going to take too long, but you also have gone through and identified 6 common career blind spots, and some ways to overcome them. So I'll leave that teaser there for anybody that's thinking about the book, but I'll just ask the question: of those 6, what's one of those that you think would be important to highlight to the audience today?
I think one of the things you've got to do is take the time to go figure out where you are. And that's what I talked about earlier. What are you known for? What's feedback on you? A lot of times we don't ask for feedback because we don't want to know. So go make a list of 7 or 8 people. This was a theme that people were driving blind. They did not know where they were on their trip. And ask, how am I doing? And then just sit there and be quiet and let them tell you. And a lot of times you have to email ahead of time and say, look, I want to talk to you about my career, be thinking about it. Because if you go in and say, I want some feedback, that's scary to people. So, just give me some advice and guidance. And me, because the feedback is such a heavy word. But go have the conversation where the net of it is you figure out where you are, how you're thought of, and then you can match that with your goals.
All right, Kyle, you ready for mine?
Go ahead, Brenda.
I love Kathryn's. And we talked about reputationality, and I can't say enough about how important that is. Some of that's in what Kathryn was just saying, but I'll tell you, we did a whole chapter on preparation and practice. And I have to tell you, this one is, in my opinion, if I could say go read any other chapter, it might be this one, because, we watch athletes and we watch stage performers, and, they are relentless at how they practice their craft and how they are constantly working on improving that performance so that when that moment comes, they are on it and it looks easy when they do it. We love this quote at the beginning of the chapter. It says, amateurs work until they can get it right, and professionals work until they cannot get it wrong. And what we know about this with working with women is that when you put this kind of focus on preparation and practice, it builds confidence. It builds this absolute knowing of whatever it is, your presence, your state, your content, your point of view. And we dive into this idea of developing a point of view in this, because often when we're coaching women, we're like, we find that they lose their voice in large meetings where key decisions are being talked about and discussed, trade-offs are being made. And what we say is, you really have to prepare a point of view. What is your belief about an issue of the business or an aspect of the business? And it may or may not be the one that you own. It could be expertise outside of your line of sight. Many feedback reports we get say, well, Brenda's great at her area, but she doesn't really speak to or know a lot about the rest of the organization. And what we say is, know your craft, but also know how it fits into the ecosystem of the rest of the business. And when you have a voice on that, you really come across differently and you feel differently when you're doing it. And it has everything to do with how prepared you are. Kathryn was coaching someone. She was sharing with me that she had a big presentation and they got together and Kathryn asked her how it went. She said, not so great. And when asked how did she prepare, she said, well, we worked hard on getting the PowerPoint together the night before. All the details were in place. We've talked about it with other people, but really hadn't spent that extra time on what is the story here? How does this best need to be cast for the audience I'm going into? Who is in the room? How are they going to vote? Where is the alternate opinion going to, or the dissenting view going to come at me? And how am I going to handle that? And so it's just a fascinating thing that we all work on. I'm constantly every week trying to get better at this and focus on preparation and practice. We're never done with it, but in my opinion, this is one that can be a game changer for women in their current roles or in a role that they're looking toward pursuing.
I'm going to use that term, alternate opinion. It's very HR appropriate for how we all feel sometimes about those folks. Well, I think wonderful content. Really appreciate all of the work and time that you put into this. I know personally I'm going to be sharing this with my women's employee resource group and thinking about ways that I can incorporate this into my own organization. So I really appreciate you putting the work into this. So we are going to shift gears. We're going to go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. So we will go ahead and get started if you're ready.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Question number 1, where does HR need to rebel?
I'll answer that, having been a former HR person, is that I feel like HR can be seen and when I go into organizations, is the ones that on a continuum, and 10 is very aligned with management, very working management's agenda. And then the 1 is very employee-centered, working for the employees, always have their needs in mind. And I think many HR departments get caught up because that number 10, the management is who pays them and promotes them. And however, if you're not employee-centered, you're not going to be successful. So you've got to be a number 1 or a number 2. I'm not saying be deaf to what management wants, but I do think HR has a unique role to hold the mirror up to management and say, this is what people are saying, speak truth to power. So I think they need to rebel and be more employee-centered and listen to management, but factor it in.
I love that one.
That's great. I think that, that visual of that 10-point scale, I think is really, it's so accurate. And I think a lot of it comes down to that incentive structure, like you mentioned, right? It's, what is HR actually incentivized to do? Do what the person that promotes them wants them to do, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. It takes somebody to push back against that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, my theory is if you don't do that, you're actually going to do a worse job because you have to be the one that speaks truth to power. And sometimes that's uncomfortable for the person that might be promoting you eventually. But if you don't do it, you're going to do your organization a disservice. So I'm with you, Kathryn. 100%.
Okay. And then I can tell you so many stories of organizations that got in huge trouble because they didn't listen to their employees. So we won't go there and name names, but they're out there.
They shall remain nameless.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
I think to the employees. I mean, I was the same point. I mean, I think, that we're at full employment. It's hard to recruit people. Everybody I talk to says, I can't get talent. I got open recs. I post a job, nobody applies. And if you're not focused on your employees and there's so much out there, people can find out if you're a good organization. So if you just got to listen to employees, I think.
I think too, listening to the system, HR has such an important vantage point. They have an ear to the leadership piece. They have an ear to the employee piece, and like there's a surround sound of what's going on in the organization. And one thing we know is important is this isn't all on women, for example, to change. I mean, this book talks about things that are clearly in our control, and we can obviously take advantage of that. But we all work in an ecosystem that is driven by various things. And sometimes those of us in that group of, call it women or other maybe underrepresented groups, can't affect the system that we are living in. But HR people have an interesting vantage point on that. So if there was who to listen to, maybe what to rebel against, there's a push-pull that can go on in an organization. What we're trying to do is push women to be ready and to be impactful, and the organization to pull that expertise up. And so I think HR are in this interesting place to help with the pull and the push, but certainly the pull. And so listening to what's going on in that system and how can it create pull is, I think, another way to listen.
I think that's really well said. And I think, I kind of think about it like this, like, we might not be the ones doing the actual work, but we own the ecosystem that the work is done within, right? That's where, that's where I think we have a high level of ownership and accountability, and holding others, accountable to that.
And that ecosystem has norms and mores and unstated written rules that unless the HR person puts them in the light of day, they're so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last question. How can our listeners connect with you and get their hands on the book?
Brenda, I'm going to let you take that.
Oh, gosh. Well, they can get their hands on the book. I think there's a link in your system, Kyle. It's on Amazon. It's called I Wish I'd Known This by Brenda, Wensil, and Kathryn Heath, 6 career accelerating secrets for women leaders. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. Both of us are out there and active. And also our company called Bravanti, which is Bravanti.com, Bravanti.com. Kyle, I bet you'll put that out there. We are a global coaching and leadership firm. We're headquartered in Chicago area, but we are all over the place. And we love talking with HR professionals about what they need to move talent forward faster, whether it's leadership, programmatic approaches, or coaching or executive coaching. Either way. So that's how you can find us. And we'd love to hear from anyone who just wants to connect or talk about challenges and how we can help you.
Perfect. And yes, we will have all that information in the show notes. Open up your podcast player, check it out, and just really sincerely appreciate the time, Kathryn and Brenda. Just a wonderful work that you're doing, and really appreciate you sharing some of that with our listeners today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Kyle.
Thank you. All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.